the first of 2023. Hoping that you had a restful holiday, and thank you for staying with us here on ZiFM Stereo. My name is Mona-Lisa Dube, and I have very special guest for this episode of Business Unusual. As we start the year, we just want to have a general idea or a perception of what we should expect throughout the year in terms of business. My guest today, I'm joined by Marjorie Mpundu, who is the World Bank Country Manager for Zimbabwe. Thank you so much for making time to chat with us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me, Mona-Lisa. We've tried this several times
for
before.
The longest time.
So I am glad we're starting the new year at this point, and greetings to your listeners. Glad to be here with them.
Thank you. And Ms. Mpundu is joined by Stella Ilieva, who is also going to join in the conversation as we proceed. She is a senior economist with the World Bank. She's a senior economist to Zimbabwe. Again, we've been trying to do this for a while, Stella.
Greetings to you and to your listeners, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. All right. Now, I know that we are going to get into the Zimbabwean context and the outlook of what we expect in Zimbabwe to perform. But then this is not done in isolation, right? This is done looking at how the global economy is functioning and how it's going to perform. And it also implicates how Zimbabwe is going to perform. So I'd like us to put our conversation in context regarding the global outlook. So I know this is a very broad question, but maybe just give us a general global outlook for 2023, I guess also referencing what happened in 2022.
Thank you, Mona-Lisa. 2023, we were hoping to start with a very bright picture on the economy, but looking at it right now, it doesn't look very good. It looks gloomy. We've just released our World Bank Global Economic Prospect Report, and what it is showing is that global growth will slow down from 2.9% in 2022 to 1.7% in 2023. This growth will be the third weakest pace. The first time we saw this was 2009, second in 2020 due to the pandemic, and this will be the third time in nearly 3 decades, mainly due to monetary policy tightening to contain very high inflation, as you know, less favorable financial conditions globally, and the disruptions from the Russia-Ukraine war. The outlook has several downside risks, including the possibility of higher inflation globally, even tighter monetary policy than we have seen in the last year, which will also cause some financial stress, and then the rising geopolitical tensions. Global inflationary pressures are moderating, reflecting softening demand and easing commodity prices. That said, it is important to bear in mind that economic growth will vary across regions, across countries.
Right.
But as you rightly said, we cannot look at the regions or countries in isolation. It's a global economy we're in.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know you highlighted a number of factors such as inflation, the Russia invasion of Ukraine, and just recently the resurgence of COVID-19 in China that also has an impact to how the world will perform, yes?
You're right. If you just go to the Russia-Ukraine war, you see how it has disrupted global economic activity through the rising energy and food prices. These have caused very high inflation across the global economies, with central banks responding by raising interest rates. High interest rates have dampened economic activity and contributed to capital flight from the emerging markets, weakening their domestic currencies. And if you look back at what happened with the COVID in the last 2 years, 2020, 2021, 2022, those disruptions from the COVID were global.
Right.
And the tightening of measures to contain COVID have the impacts from that. We're still seeing them. And the re-emergence of the COVID, the new variant, I'm really hoping we stay away from the containment measures that dampen the economy. But again, it depends on the impact. And maybe let me bring in Stella to expand on that as well.
Yes, it will have major impact because China is importing from mineral resources and other raw materials from the region, and reduced demand in China will surely affect growth in our countries here in the region. And actually, China and the growth in United States, they affect significantly the global growth projections.
So it's like we were happy that we are getting out of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think last year at the ZNCC also gave some stats on how the COVID-19 pandemic actually affected the global economy. And we are hoping that it doesn't go back to what it was the past couple of years.
For sure, that is our hope. But we have to watch closely where this is going. The important thing is the lessons that we have learned from the past 2 years that can inform how we go forward on the economic side.
And as you know, the World Economic Forum is currently ongoing in Davos in Switzerland. And some of the issues that you highlighted now are very topical currently with the global leaders talking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the resurgence of the COVID-19. And there also seems to be mixed opinions, mixed feelings regarding the possibility of a global recession. So maybe you can give us your take on that as a World Bank. First of all, maybe you can just give us some of the, lay out what entails a global recession, and are we seeing those signs heading into 2023?
Yeah. Thank you, Mona-Lisa. So the possibility of a recession depends on several factors. The main ones being the extent of which the major central banks tighten monetary policy. If the major central banks tighten significantly their monetary policy in response to rising inflation expectations, and tighter financial conditions lead to significant financial difficulties across emerging markets and developing economies, this could leave the world in a recession. Nevertheless, the growth across regions again would differ. And what we are seeing are some brighter spots, especially in the Middle East, in North Africa, and South Asia, which may mitigate the possibility of a recession. So it's very difficult at this point. There are very varied views, strong views on whether we're going into a recession and strong views on whether we're not going to. I think what's important is to focus on what those factors and look closely, monitor those factors. And that is what will indicate whether we're going that way or not.
And in your assessment, you highlight that there are several policies that need to be put in place, especially by the central banks. What are these policies that you think would actually tighten that to make sure that the world doesn't get into a recession?
Stella, do you want to take that one?
Yes, the monetary policies, of course, some tightening will still be needed, but it should be done to ensure that inflation expectations are anchored. But it should be done in a way it's communicated clearly and central bank independence is strengthened. Also, it's important to strengthen macroprudential policies because banks might experience difficulties with increased interest rate risks. So it's important to take these three issues into account.
And there is a word, Stella, that economists around the world are throwing around lately, stagflation, which is I'm not an economist, but based from what they explain, would be it's a combination of stagnation and inflation, right? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, this is a risk that we analyzed in our previous global economic prospects report. The risk is that inflation, although now the expectations are that because of this monetary tightening and lower consumption, inflation will subside, but the risk is that it might actually continue, prices might actually continue to be elevated, and with slow growth, it will further dampen future growth opportunities.
And when we look at, I can also bring this back to you, Ms. Mpundu, when we look at the cost of living across the world, I mean, if you read the news, if you follow trends on social media, everyone is talking about how the cost of living in their respective countries has gone up in the past couple of years. Are we going to see this trend continue?
You know, the reality is we are living in very high cost situation or circumstances. The inflation, I don't know whether you follow the inflation rankings that we do. I think we do them monthly, and we're ranking countries, and this, you see a few changes in the rankings of the countries. It is affecting everyone. It's a global shock that we are experiencing. So is it going to continue or not? It's safe to say we'll see this going on for a while until there is some change on the economic side. But again, with the global shocks that we've talked about, it's very difficult to see that. And beyond the global shocks of the pandemic, the global shock of the war in Ukraine, look at the climate changes as well. What helps a number of our countries especially is the agriculture side. If that is impacted, then the cost of living will not be going down. You want to come in, Stella, as well?
Yes, the cost of living has increased significantly because of higher food prices, higher fuel prices, and governments can help once by supporting, mitigating the impact on the poor, but also by supporting, by implementing structural reforms in support of growth. And not all countries have fiscal space to do this support to the poor. That's why it's critical that inefficient spending at this time is minimized, and spending is directed
by the government.
Spending by the government is directed to key basic services, and investment also is prioritized to investments that will support growth.
This is Business Unusual. I am Mona-Lisa Dube, and this evening we are looking at the economic outlook, the global economic outlook, and I am joined by the World Bank Country Manager for Zimbabwe, Marjorie Mpundu, as well as Stella Ilieva, who is a senior economist with the World Bank and for Zimbabwe. We'll take a quick break, and thereafter we will also look into the Zimbabwean context and how these other factors that we have discussed will affect the growth of Zimbabwe. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us here on ZiFM Stereo. I am Mona-Lisa Dube, and this is Business Unusual. My guest this evening, I'm joined by representatives from the World Bank. I'm joined by Marjorie Mpundu, who is the World Bank Country Manager for Zimbabwe, as well as Stella Ilieva, who is a senior economist with the World Bank for Zimbabwe as well. And we're talking global economic outlook as well as a Zimbabwean outlook as we just started out 2023. Now, Ms. Mpundu, I know we before the break we spoke about a number of factors that are happening across the world, and I know we spoke about the debates regarding a global recession, etc. And I know that earlier on we actually did agree that Zimbabwe obviously, just like any other country across the world, is definitely going to be affected by these trends that we are experiencing across the world. So I'm sure we're going to get into that detail, just to what extent these are going to affect Zimbabwe. But maybe just give us the World Bank perspective of the general outlook for the Zimbabwean economy.
Thank you, Mona-Lisa. So let me step back and look at 2022. The economy last year is estimated to have grown with a real GDP growth over 3.4%. Our latest projections show that there will be some economic recovery going on in Zimbabwe, a little higher than what we're seeing on the global side. But this is likely to slow down. So if you look at the Global Prospects report that we just released, we have a number there for Zimbabwe, but we have to watch closely to see how all these global shocks are impacting Zimbabwe, including the climatic shock. So in 2022, you look at the economic growth. What drove that economic growth? It was the mining, the recovery of tourism, and other services that were previously affected by the pandemic.
Right.
However, as I said, the multiple and connected global shocks contributed to the slowing pace of the economic growth here in Zimbabwe and increased the price and exchange rate volatility. The impact of these global shocks,
which was already not doing very well,
exactly,
despite all this,
and that's the point. These impacts on the Zimbabwean economy were significant because we were already in a high inflation and weak local currency situation.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that, sorry, before you go on, Ms. Mpundu, would you say that Zimbabwe is currently in a hyperinflation period? I know that's another thing that economists debate on. Are we in hyperinflation or is it just inflation? Would you say we are in a hyperinflation in Zimbabwe?
Yeah.
Hyperinflation is when you have inflation rate increasing by 50% in a month, which we don't have in Zimbabwe. Actually, monthly inflation rate has been on a declining trend since September, I think. So we can't say we have hyperinflation. Inflation in 2022, annual average inflation was 198%, significantly higher than previous year, but certainly not a hyperinflation.
All right, thank you for that clarity. So you were going to also go ahead and tell us some of the factors regarding the Zimbabwean performance.
So now, if we look at 2023, what are we projecting? We are projecting some economic growth on account of expected improvements in agricultural conditions and stronger consumption as prices stabilize. However, the downside risks to the outlook have significantly increased. Domestic risks are mostly linked to the ability of the government to control price and exchange rate volatility. Potential relaxation of policies, especially given that we're going into the election period, can further fuel inflationary pressures. Gains in reducing exchange rate distortions in 2022 from about August to December steadily reduced the parallel market premium, but this has started increasing slightly. Climate change risks can also affect performance of agriculture, bringing down the overall economic growth. If you recall, 2021 growth was propelled by a good agriculture season. If that is affected, it will affect, if the agriculture season does not perform well, it will affect the growth.
And the Minister of Finance has actually projected the growth of Zimbabwe premised on the agriculture season of the country.
Exactly. So we have to watch that as well, because that could either propel the growth or bring it down. And again, we can never look at Zimbabwe in isolation. We have to look at the external shocks the sharp decline on the global growth in other countries, the global price dynamics, food and energy insecurity, and tighter financial conditions globally will impact the growth here as well.
You speak of earlier on, as you were giving your description of what you anticipate the Zimbabwean economy to perform, you speak of price control by the government. I'm not getting quite the sense of, are you for price control by the government, or you were saying the government needs not to control the prices, because that has obviously affected how the economy has performed in previous years?
No, in no way we mean any price controls. What Marjorie was saying was to control inflation expectations and to manage inflation through monetary policy and fiscal policy measures and all the measures that the government has.
Yeah, because obviously it is the market that then determines the prices, and then not the government. Okay, I just wanted clarity on that. Yeah. All right, so President Mnangagwa's administration has been really big on re-engagement over an isolation period of about 2 decades, right? So in your work and in the work that you do as a World Bank, what is the current perception of Zimbabwe?
So yes, we're working very closely with the government on re-engagement, and we really look forward to a day when Zimbabwe will re-engage and be able to tap into the global financing, especially from multilaterals like us. And I think this economy will grow even bigger. On the perception, every year the World Bank carries out what we call the Country Policy Institutional Analysis, the CPIA. The CPIA for Africa is an annual diagnostic tool that measures each country's quality of policies and institutional frameworks and their ability to support sustainable growth and poverty reduction. For Zimbabwe, the CPIA has been improving every year, increasing from 2.8 in 2018 to 3.0 in 2021.
What are some of the factors that are contributing to this?
Very interesting question, because we have a number of things that we rate.
Okay.
And we're just doing the 2023 one. 2022 one, which will be released in a couple of months. Yes. So if you look at where Zimbabwe performs better, it's on the gender equality, human capital, building human resources, and environmental sustainability, revenue mobilization, and the quality of public administration.
Really?
Those are the core areas, yes.
Public administration, that's interesting.
If I may add, one of the improvement is also in this economic governance areas. Yeah. For example, debt management. Even recently, we published the debt transparency heat map, where Zimbabwe used to have out of 9-10 different areas of debt transparency. Zimbabwe had 2 red flags. Now there are no red flags, so there is improvement there. There was steady improvement in debt transparency, and it has been also reflected into the improvement of the overall score.
Okay, so it's very interesting to hear your institution highly rate Zimbabwe like this in terms of improvements, etc. But how do these improvements that you speak about gender equality, about how, resource accumulation, getting resources together, revenue together. And I know that's one of the factors that economists say Zimbabwe is really good at, gathering revenue, putting the monies together. Even the Reserve Bank governor has said this, that when it comes to actually getting foreign currency, it's not really a problem with Zimbabwe. So where do then the wheels fall off so much that the average person, the average Zimbabwean, does not necessarily feel these improvements that that you speak of, these improvements that the Minister of Finance speaks of, as well as the Reserve Bank Governor speaks of?
Well, I think these improvements will be felt once the economy stabilizes. Inflation rates are in single-digit levels, annual inflation rates, I mean. Then it will be the living standards will improve, and once there are jobs and quality jobs, not only jobs in the informal sector, which are usually paid less compared to the formal sector. So price stability and conditions for doing business that are incentivizing formal sector, this is when people will be able to feel these positive changes.
And roughly what time frame do we have? Like, because I'm sure somebody who's listening is like, okay, at what point in your perception, at what point is Zimbabwe going to get there where life gets easier for an ordinary Zimbabwean? From your projections, from the work that the government is doing, from the work that you have seen on the ground.
Okay, we for our country economic memorandum, we did some projections what it will take for Zimbabwe to reach upper middle income country status by 2030, and our simulations show that Zimbabwe will need to grow at a much higher annual growth rate of GDP.
Of how much percent?
Almost double digit. So
and we are currently at 3.5 roundabout.
Yes, and productivity will need to grow at 9% per year, and productivity of industry is improving, but productivity of agriculture is very low, and when this will change, it's difficult to predict. It depends on the policies that the government will implement in the future.
But what are the chances of getting a 9% productivity rate?
Well, some countries have done this. It's difficult to do it for a longer period of time, but it's not impossible. Even I think for Zimbabwe, industrial productivity has improved. Our analysis show that actually the skill level here is much better than in countries with in countries that are already upper middle income countries. But the productivity level is lower, but I mean the country has potential.
Absolutely.
So the skill level is there, the natural and mineral resources are there. It's just the sustaining macroeconomic stability for a long period of time will help get these positive results for a larger group of Zimbabweans.
And what is your take, your perception regarding capacity utilization in Zimbabwe? Because I think that's also one of the factors that contribute to high productivity rates.
So we did look at that in the country economic memorandum, so
yes,
you can speak to that.
The capacity utilization is constrained by several factors. One is the limited access to finance that firms have, especially small and medium-sized firms. Also, probably there is some skill mismatch in some sectors. And these macroeconomic issues, they also affect significantly capacity utilization. So if you know that inflation is increasing rapidly and exchange rate is not stable, it's difficult to plan and to implement a business as usual.
Yeah, and those are some of the factors that when you attend, I know Stella and I, we've met several times at these business conferences, when people in business highlight these factors a lot of time to say it's just difficult to plan in Zimbabwe. You don't know what the policy is going to be today. You don't know what the policy is going to be tomorrow. And there's an issue that you highlighted, Stella, that I want to follow up with Ms. Mpundu here regarding access to finance. Now, you find that the performance of a country or the confidence of a country sometimes comes as a reflection of the amount of investment that particular country will be having at a particular time. Walk us through what you found or what your perception is regarding investment, especially foreign direct investment in Zimbabwe.
We can look at it from different angles. Let me focus on where the multilaterals come in. Zimbabwe has not been able to access financing from multilaterals like the African Development Bank, the IMF, and the World Bank for over 20 years.
Why?
Because of arrears owed to the multilaterals and to some the debt sustainability is off. So they owe the bank and the Africa Development Bank about 2.5
billion.
Yes, including arrears. And this has barred them from accessing cheap financing that could help with the development here. They've repaid IMF, but because we have cross-conditionality, they have not been able to access IMF funding as well. So that affects the level of development here. On foreign direct investment, maybe Stella, you can come in if you have the numbers.
Yes, the numbers are not impressive because this arrear situation and unsustainable debt level also affect, I think, investments. But this macroeconomic instability is not attractive to investors, and the business regulation also is probably not conducive for foreign direct investments. We know that Zimbabwe made significant progress in improving doing business regulations, but still, if we look at the rank, it was from 2020. Zimbabwe was like 140th in the world, so still significant improvements are needed. And foreign direct investments are critical to improve investment and also to transfer knowledge, know-how, and provide jobs for Zimbabweans.
So how have you worked with the government in terms of trying to establish an understanding as to when these arrears are going to be cleared, when the debt is going to be cleared, what the plan is? Because I know, like you said, you do work with the government. So the conversations that you're having, what is the situation regarding the clearing of these arrears?
So just to give perspective, a bit of perspective, in Africa we had until 2021, 3 countries in arrears to the World Bank. There was Somalia, there was Sudan, no, actually 4. Somalia, Sudan, Eritrea, and Zimbabwe. In the last 3 years, we've seen Sudan and Somalia clear their arrears. So
really?
Yes. And the point is, these are our shareholders. So we work with them. We work with the government. We have very good relationship, very good dialogue with the government. They really desire to clear their arrears. The reality is it's a huge amount. And those arrears have to be cleared to both Africa Development Bank and the World Bank. And then there's another level of credit that have to be cleared to make sure that there's debt sustainability here before we can come in with big programs. So the government is leading its own work on arrears clearance. It's brought together all the multilaterals, all the development partners, the international community. There's a dialogue being led by the president of the Africa Development Bank on arrears clearance, and they have engaged President Chisano, former President Chisano of Mozambique, to co-lead this work. There are various aspects that need to be addressed to be able to get to that last milestone, but the journey is begun.
But does this mean that Somalia is a better performing country than Zimbabwe if they're able to clear out arrears and Zimbabwe is lagging behind?
So the way we clear arrears is not so much on the ability of the country to... There's always a third-party country or a group of countries that would provide bridge financing to clear those arrears. A country on its own with insurmountable debt like that cannot, from their own books, be able to clear. So we work with different countries. We work on a reform matrix that the government is able to implement. And once those reforms are implemented, we are able to come in, or there'll be a third-party country that will be able to come in with bridge financing that would cover then the financing that we
So
provide.
what is in the way of the third parties to come in with that bridge finance? You speak about reforms.
So our experience doing arrears clearance is there are always critical reforms that the government has to undertake.
Okay.
The reforms that we talk about in our country economic memorandum on the structural side of the economy are critical. The IMF in their Article 4 has been very clear on the macro stability, on the forex, and on the quasi-fiscal operations being big picture items that can help us cross over to the other side. That's on the economic side. There's also the political track that has to be undertaken. On the political governance side, some reforms that the government has committed to doing and are discussing with the international community on what would be the benchmarks for success. So it's not like they don't want to engage. I think they've tried. I think 2015 we came very close to that point and it didn't work out. Again, last year we came very close and it didn't work out.
Where are the wheels falling off?
It's a complicated process.
Okay.
But the important thing is the wheels keep moving.
Right.
The wheels
they keep moving and they seem to be falling off again.
It takes years. But we have experience and they have peers to look to that they can learn from on how it has been done.
I like your very diplomatic answers, Ms. Mpundu. There's something that you also highlighted earlier about how even Zimbabwe has cleared the IMF arrears and the debt there, they still cannot access fund there as well due to the areas that they owe to you. I think you called it cross...
we have cross conditionality or what's the term? Pari passu.
Yes.
So when countries borrow, we ask that they treat all of us lenders equally.
Okay.
So they can't repay one over the other, So they repaid the loan to the arrears to the IMF were much lower
than what they owe.
They could afford to pay it. But what should have happened was to
balance it out.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So I was asking to then ask to say, okay, as far as embargoes are concerned, as far as sanctions are concerned, does this also apply to say, okay, because you have been flagged by certain countries or by certain institutions for whatever reasons, and you cannot access certain advantages that other countries can access. As the World Bank, does it also apply to you to say, okay, because you have these embargoes, these sanctions, therefore we're also flagging you on our end for A, B, C, D?
No, we do not follow bilateral sanctions. At the most, the sanctions that would follow are those articulated by the UN. So it's nothing to do with sanctions for us. It's all about the arrears that are owed to the bank and to the sister institutions.
So, Ms. Mpundu, I know that despite all of these challenges that are in the way, you are working closely with the government as well as the private sector. Can you tell us some of the work that you're doing, working with the Zimbabwean authorities or different companies?
Thank you, Mona-Lisa. So I think the first point you have to note is that Zimbabwe is a shareholder of the World Bank. And that's why we have presence here. Even though there are barriers, we're working. What
percentage shareholding? Does it come in percentages?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know the percentage, but it is a shareholder. And we are here. We're present on the ground. We have a team of almost 30 people working here. We have a very close relationship with the government, especially our key counterparts, Ministry of Finance and the Reserve Bank. What we've been doing over the years is to provide analytical work, advisory support to the government using our own funding and funding also from development partners who entrust some funding to us. So even though there's not much lending, we are building. We are a knowledge bank and we pride ourselves in that. So what we do is bring the core analytical work that forms the foundation or informs what the government can do in policies. So the country economic memorandum is one of those. We did an in-depth review of the economy, especially on the informality, on the manufacturing side, on the trade side, and come up with recommendations. And the government will take that up in the policy. It informs the policies that they make, and they've asked us to work with them on that. We've done the poverty assessment and again come up with recommendations there. We're currently doing the country climate diagnostic report. It's a new instrument. We're looking at the climate. What does Zimbabwe need to do to prepare for all these climatic shocks? What financing do they need to do? That's a foundational document that can be taken on by investors, the private sector. It informs a lot of what they can do on the climate side. We're also working on the gender assessment, building on what actually the Ministry of Gender is already doing, again, informing policies. So we're very present here. And we also have a few projects that are actually going on an exceptional basis. When Cyclone Idai hit Zimbabwe, the board actually released $72 million to help with the response to the Cyclone Idai. And we have a health program going on, which is results-based financing. We work on maternal health. We work with on child health. We are also getting into education now, hopefully to do a project in education. Right. So we very
haven't
active.
entirely deserted the country.
We cannot. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Mpundu, for making time to chat with us here on Business and Usual to talk about projections of the year and how the World Bank is working with Zimbabwe. Marjorie Mpundu is a World Bank country manager for Zimbabwe, and I was also joined by Stella, who is a senior economist with the World Bank for Zimbabwe. Appreciate you ladies for making time to chat with us. It's been such a insightful conversation. I hope to have you again sometime where we do follow-ups and checkups every now and then.
Sure. Very nice to have for you to have us here, and very nice to speak with your listeners as well.
Thank you. And that's all the time we had. And that's it for this evening's Business Unusual. I am Mona-Lisa Dube. I'll be back again, same time next week. Stay with us here on ZiFM Stereo.